Hey folks, Kieran here. Before we jump into the podcast, just wanted to let you know I had a bit of a snafu with the saving of our project. My PC crashed right as we ended the recording, so I lost most of the raw audio file. Thankfully, I was able to recover most of it from the video file, which did actually save. So I had to do a ton of editing. The volume levels are a little imbalanced this episode, but hopefully you can forgive us. I think I've done the best job I can. I think it sounds okay, but if you're hearing a little bit of background noise during this episode, I sincerely apologize. We'll be back and up to our professional standard as usual for the next episode, but thanks for sticking with us. Hope you enjoy it. All right, welcome to Death and Praxis. This is the podcast where we talk about the systems that rule our lives and the moment at which they inevitably can't. My name is Kieran, and I'm just a guy who likes politics. I'm a vocalist, I'm a singer, I'm in a punk rock band, and I really like talking about the big topics in life.
My name is Charlotte, and I am a funeral director and embalmer. I have an interest in politics that really just mostly stems from an interest in community care and compassion.
Right on. So our episode today, we're going to be talking about animal funerals and rituals, talking a little bit about the way that animals grieve and mourn each other in the animal kingdom, and then the way that humans and people end up memorializing the animal friends in their lives as well. So taking a little bit of a departure from some of the political stuff and talking a little bit more about death care, but globalizing it and talking a little bit about the entirety of our environment and the beings that we share this planet with.
Yeah, animals shouldn't be political, but it is, just like everything else.
Yeah, unfortunately.
How we interact with them anyways. We want to talk a little bit about grief and processing in the animal kingdom, some examples of different species and how they process death, whether individually or in groups.
Yeah, and then the other topics we're going to go through, we're going to talk a little bit about how humans grieve for those that we share nature with, such as pets, farm animals, even like, hunting animals for livestock, things like that, getting into a little bit of how we handle those. And then we're going to touch a little bit on some of the posthumous preservation and care, such as things like taxidermy, mementos, preservation, ashes, all of those weird things that we humans do to, maybe extend the the perceived life of our animal companions versus just letting them hit the ground like most other animals do in the animal kingdom. So
or sometimes just their bodies. Sometimes animals you didn't even know. Taxidermy is often just carcasses into art, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that for mourning? Probably not. It's for some other weird obsession that we have.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to start off by just kind of jumping into some of the groundwork and some of the facts about animals and how they have reactions to death and stuff. I'll let Charlotte kind of take it away and talk a little bit about some of those processes.
Yeah, so we know that a lot of different animal species show prolonged responses to death. It suggests that grief or grief-like behaviors may not be unique to just humans. Scientists debate whether these behaviors represent true grief or something that is more just social or cognitive processing. Social animals are the most likely to exhibit responses to death, particularly species that form strong long-term bonds with family members or companions. So these are animal groups where they mate for life, animal groups where they are in bands or groups, murders, just deep long-term community bonds within the animal groups. Some of the animal groups with the most research into death rituals and grief responses are whales and dolphins, chimpanzees and other primates, crows and magpies. And then I know that you also found a little bit about elephants, so there's been a little bit of research there too.
Shout out to the pachyderms.
Pachyderms? Is that the term for group, like the group that elephants are in?
Yeah.
Pachyderms. Interesting. Scientists caution in a lot of this research that we don't want to assume that what these animals are experiencing is like human grief, because emotions can't be directly measured in animals. Researchers often describe these actions as post-mortem attentive behavior rather than grief. This term refers to observable behaviors directed towards a dead individual without making assumptions that the animal is experiencing certain emotions. So, post-mortem attentive behavior, I actually had not heard of that term before researching into this a little bit, but it's basically what scientists use to describe animals and their actions towards a dead member of their own species after death without assuming that an animal is experiencing grief. Examples of post-mortem attentive behavior can be things like carrying around or supporting the body of a dead infant or dead member of the community, nudging or pushing or touching of the deceased, staying close to the body, almost like in vigil or being on guard for extended periods, guarding the body from predators or other animals, and then vocalizing behaviors. So we got to experience a little bit of that the other day. We'll go into that later, but cries and seemingly in unison that, from the outside we can really only interpret as some sort of grief ritual.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too. Like, I mean, a lot of this stuff, like, yeah, I can see why a scientist doesn't want to assign a certain mental state or anthropomorphize an animal in a certain way. But when you read a lot of this stuff, it's like, how is it not? Like you imagine like a baby animal of something, a squirrel or something, like, nudging its dead mother. You go, of course it's in pain. What
We've
the
all
fuck are you
seen
talking?
The Lion King.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like it's kind of crazy, like reading this and just being like, okay, let's not be too cautious here. They might not feel sad. And you're like, come on, man, come on.
You can't see inside their minds, but what we're witnessing is tragedy and experienced tragedy. So PMAB, we'll call it, which is the postmortem attention behavior, also known as grief, maybe. But they say it doesn't prove that an animal is grieving. It provides evidence of strong social relationships that have become an important area of research in just general animal behavior and cognition. So philosophers and scientists disagree on what qualifies as grief. Surprise, surprise, hence why PMAB even exists.
Yeah.
It might not be sadness. Some people argue that grief requires understanding that death is permanent and recognizing future absence, which animals show object permanence. So where's the argument against animals having this ability? I don't really know.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess recognizing future absence would mean that with the lack of that, they would assume that they'd come back, right? They would assume that their mom would be there the next day or something, and there's an observation that, okay, this is permanent. And I think this is something we talked about, we'll get into this a little bit later, but we had a pet that passed recently, and one of the important discussions was do we let our other cat, Mona, see the body so that she can maybe grow an understanding that there is not a future expectation that he will be there.
Yeah.
And
what does that recognition look like in her?
Yeah. And I've heard that a lot from other pet owners, right? You have multiple dogs. Does the living dog get to interact with the dead dog to kind of gain that understanding? Because otherwise it can cause a lot of stress, right? The other pet, Buddy went out the front door and then never came back in, and so they pace and they show these stress behaviors, expecting that that there will be that future interaction when definitively there won't, right?
Yeah. And so scientists are trying to, be scientific about it and say, because there's not a clear communication that we can have with these animals that's going to dictate exactly the emotions that they're feeling, they call it post-mortem attentive behavior. But then there's others, like a philosopher named Becky Miller, who argues that grief is better understood as the gradual process of adapting to life without a companion or without a certain bond. And it's a process that all animals experience in some way. And that again, to me, just sounds like another definition to grief. The strength of social bonds is agreed upon that it's the biggest dictator of how animals are going to respond to death. Animals that depend heavily on close companions, like mates, often show the longest and most persistent behaviors after a loss. Their routines and social lives are disrupted, and it requires behavioral adjustment. And you'll even see things like apathy in animals, like this disinterest in life, this disinterest in food, in things that were formerly, enriching for this animal. And again, that is so like human grief, to deny yourself pleasures of life almost subconsciously because you love something or someone that can no longer enjoy those things.
Yeah, exactly. Like after Captain died, I was saying like food tasted like gray. Like there was, I didn't want to eat. Like it was like there was,
Everything's gray.
yeah, everything just sucked, and there was nothing that was, enjoyable. And I can see how, if we're, again, kind of painting some of these emotions onto animals and stuff. Like, yeah, there's many animals that will just neglect themselves or their needs or things that used to bring them joy. After a death, and again, PMAB, not anthropomorphizing. It might not be grief, but
It's not
like,
grief,
yeah,
it's PMAB.
yeah, exactly. But yeah. Anyways, sorry.
So this whole field is called comparative thanatology, which is so interesting because it's not just blanket as like animal thanatology. It needs to be like compared to human grief. We can't just talk about animal grief without comparing it to our human experience, because that's all we have to go on. So comparative thanatology is the scientific study of how animals respond to death. So just death rituals, whatever that is to them. Researchers compare behaviors across different species to better understand the evolution of these social bonds, how it affects cognition and emotional responses to death. The evidence is increasingly suggesting that many species experience significant behavioral and possibly emotional changes following the death of a close companion, even if their understanding differs from our own. So again, like, they're trying to be neutral about it in these studies, but all of the evidence is suggesting that most of these animals that have strong bonds in life through community, through whether it's groups of creatures that kind of raise young together, they are showing all of the telltale signs, in my opinion, as a death care worker, of experiencing grief.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think like part of this is that they're trying not to, find a definition for grief, right? But you have to ask, like, if we break things down to their most base descriptors of the of the phenomenon. What happens to a human in grief? Well, okay, I'm sure there's certain changes in the brain or the hormones that are being released. There is behavioral changes. You don't want to eat. Are self-destructive in certain ways. Depression, anxiety, like all these things that are measurable and demonstrable. Are things that we see in these cases.
We all know a dog with anxiety. Right?
Yeah, exactly. They're all things that we see in these cases, but there's this idea that other animals' brains might work in different ways, and so therefore, even other emotions, happiness doesn't work the same for a dog as it does for you. Excitement doesn't work the same for another animal as it does for you. But it's funny because like they try to keep things very separate and clinical and make sure that like in these research settings we don't kind of defer to one standard over another, which is understandable in a lot of ways. But we all come from the same family tree eventually. Like you go back far enough, every dog is your cousin at some point, like,
yeah, and also there's like this human need to just define everything as if we're the first ones discovering it. Death was long before we lived. Like, death existed in this universe before humans were around to try to put categories on what grief means. And so speaking of depression, this is a hard one.
Yeah. So it was interesting because as Charlotte was kind of doing the research for this episode and kind of coming up with some of these definitions, and I was reading about PMAB and stuff.
Fucking PMAB. I hate it.
Oh, I hate saying it too. We should not, but
it's a good point to make because it came up in a lot of the research that they hesitated to call it grief.
Yeah.
Anyways.
But this kind of led me to thinking about like, okay, like are there demonstrable cases where an animal has taken extreme measures due to grief? And I started looking particularly at animal suicides. Like are there cases where an animal has taken its own life due to grief? Because that's something we know humans do a lot, unfortunately. But it begged the question, so I went and looked it up. And yeah, like it's interesting because it also rides this line of like, we don't know how to categorize it. It's not quite clear. Many animals that are depressed or grieving tend to exhibit self-destructive behavior that sometimes ends in death, but it's often not considered suicide, as the achievement of death was not necessarily the objective.
But it's interesting that it's chasing pain in a way. In almost any circumstance, it's denial of food for long periods of time, animals banging against things or chewing on parts of their bodies incessantly that is obviously causing pain, but it's still some sort of relief to these anxieties.
Yeah, like in this article, a bunch of the examples I was reading was like, like feather plucking in birds, like parrots and stuff like that lose their mates will just like incessantly pluck their own feathers, and
then they have to be knit little sweaters.
Yeah, and there's this happens in cases where there's not death or grief as well. This is also a stress response that happens when they go through traumatic moves or injuries or care scenarios or abuse or things like that as well. So this is attributed as general stress, not necessarily like specifically grief or specifically a suicidal action. But there are examples in the animal kingdom of like of animal suicide or stress-related self-destructive behavior that has led to animals dying. One of the very kind of famous cases was the dolphin that portrayed Flipper in the 1960s TV show, not the movies that us millennials would have grown up with. Apparently suffocated herself when removed from the care of her trainer and moved into a lab setting. So
what is suffocating yourself for a dolphin?
Just
Beaching
choosing
yourself?
not to open they're mammals. They breathe air.
Right, they breathe air. So does that mean she drowned herself?
Yeah, essentially. Or I guess, just didn't come up for air, right?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That takes so much willpower.
Oh, yeah. Especially. And, again, like, there's controversy around it. Was it a suicide? How did it work? And again, I don't know the scenario. Maybe it was that she just dove deep enough and just, like, by the time that biological urge to swim up kicked in, she was too deep, that sort of thing,
but
right?
Still, that shows intention,
yeah,
right?
Yeah,
Ooh.
exactly. And so you could call it a case of a miscalculation in the grief of normal behaviors. Oh, that she went for a dive and then never came back, right?
That's
but
one way to say it.
Yeah, exactly. And again, there's this kind of clinical sense of, oh, we don't want to get too tied to a certain label, when again clearly there was something that was being fatally experienced here, and also like one of the very common ones that is seen a lot is dogs just refusing food after the death of their owner. This happens pretty frequently, and we've seen examples as well of dogs just like guarding or staying by their owners after death, staying by their graves. There's I wish I had looked this up. There's a very famous dog. I want to say like in Halifax or something.
Isn't there a statue?
Yeah, there's a statue of him that's sitting next to. I should look that up.
So I can just say that I hear from families all the time in helping people through grief and to arrange funerals and things like that. The family dog is grieving with you. I would argue the family cat is too. I'm sure there's a lot of other people with other pets that say that they would experience grief too. But what we hear about the most is dogs. I often get the question, is it okay for me to bring my dog to the funeral service? Yes, absolutely. If you think that that's good for the animal to be close, do it. And yeah, we also talked about how the smell is so important, and animals can tell when our bodies are deceased, and they do have a semblance of understanding that this was their person's body, but their person is not there anymore. So yeah, I have witnessed dogs at funerals go up, sniff the casket, do a whimper, and then lie down near it, or otherwise, walk away to other family members, kind of acknowledging that this person is not going to be the one to pet them today.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's like, we saw that as well. Like, I don't know if I can't tell, is Mona on the other side of you there?
Mona's right here, yeah.
Mona's over there. So yeah, like again, our cat Captain passed away about a month ago, and when we brought him home, we decided that we did want to allow Mona to kind of see that and understand that. And so we laid his body out, and we had a nice shroud and flowers and stuff, but she was able to kind of walk over. She like walked up to the couch, kind of peeked her head up, she sniffed a little bit, and you could tell she was a little spooked. She ran away, she did a lap of the apartment, but then she perched herself up on a desk over there and just kind of watched as we cared for him. And it was interesting because like she could clearly tell that what was going on, and it was clearly upsetting for her. She displayed some stressful behaviors and stuff, but
she knew. She knew immediately.
Yeah.
She knew in a way that she didn't before we brought his body home.
Yeah.
So again, it's hard for us to interpret what that means to her, but in the moment it seemed like some sort of understanding that she didn't otherwise have.
Yeah. So, on the case of animals exhibiting stress and potential suicides, a lot of the cases are kind of attributed to, death caused by
almost like self-negligence or apathy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and they attribute it to things like starvation or drowning, instead of like the intent of suicide, right? We don't have an example of an animal directly just throwing themselves off a cliff in despair, but we do have a lot of examples of self-neglect to a point of death, which to me is not all that different, especially for an animal who maybe just doesn't have the agency. I mean, again, we talk about how animals use tools and stuff all the time, or like how they don't use tools all the time. There's only a select couple species in the entire animal kingdom that will use a twig to grab a snack, and none that use weapons.
Is the use of tools or your environment. So it does take that level of cognition that maybe is the separation of jumping off of a cliff versus holding your breath.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like for them, the deprivation of a thing that they understand is maybe the closest that their cognition can bring them to that. Whereas, like, again, like we don't have an example of animal weapon use. We have chimpanzees.
I don't know. I saw this video of this one dog that got trained to use a sword. He's amazing. Go find him on Instagram. I don't know what his name is, but just he's the only dog with a sword, I bet. Anyways, but he uses it for good, not evil. I know what you're saying.
So maybe that's where the difference lies in that. But so I mean, like, obviously, pretty heavy stuff there, but we're gonna jump into a little bit of some examples from the animal kingdom, just talking about how some different species handle this, some of the kind of unique rituals that have been observed in nature, and kind of go through some of those things and maybe how they compare to humans as well.
Yeah, so a big one that we have a lot of studies on is whales and dolphins. Cetaceans, is that the right word? Whales and dolphins are in the cetaceans pool. They've been observed displaying behaviors that resemble mourning after the death of a member of their group. As we know, they travel in pods, in packs. One of the most famous examples is the orca Tahlequah. Is that how you pronounce her name? Tahlequah or Tahlequah. Anyways, around here she's known as J35 to the science community. She carried her newborn calf for 17 days. In this case, so she's a female killer whale. She's spotted off the coast of Washington State, pushing the body of her newborn calf. She was observed doing the same thing in 2018 after the death of another one of her calves. So she's done this twice in her life. It's been a repeated behavior when a calf of hers dies. So on this occasion, Tahlequah pushed the body of her offspring for 17 days, continuously retrieving it and preventing it from sinking. So like almost keeping them afloat near the top. It was an incredible feat considering that the killer whale often travels an average or can only travel an average of 120 kilometers a day. So if she was just going, I don't know if she was continuing on a migratory path and just wanted to bring the calf with her, or if it's some sort of death procession that was maybe not going anywhere in particular. She traveled potentially 2,040 kilometers or about 1,200 miles.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I remember that story kind of getting brought up. It was a big one around here because she was part of the southern resident killer whales, which are they're kind of a genetically distinct lineage of killer whale that lives in the Pacific Northwest off the coast of BC, Washington, and potentially down to California and whatnot. So these whales are often observed around the waters in Vancouver where we are. There's 3 pods, I think J, K, and L pod. And J pod, which Taliqua is a part of, there's about 27 members of that pod that move around the waters here. So we often hear reports of them being spotted in the Burrard Inlet or, off the coast of Vancouver Island.
Whales are born.
So it's usually kind of relatively big news around here when there's a birth in these pods of whales. And that story carried a whole lot because there was a lot of excitement about this birth of a new killer whale calf in J pod. And then when it was discovered that the calf had died, there was this kind of heavy following where people were almost tracking how long she would be able to kind of continue pushing it for. And more than 2 weeks of just continuously nudging this along. And you can imagine the stress that would put on her as well, just that extra weight having to push it through the water. And I'm sure there's going to be smaller fish kind of chasing and trying to nibble out little predators
risk.
Or
you're pushing around a dead animal in the ocean, you're drawing predators. She does not care.
Scavengers.
So I couldn't again, that is to me a clear demonstration of grief. That is ignoring your own self-preservation and comfort to physically hold up a deceased member of your family. So scientists have recorded postmortem attentive behavior or grief in at least 20 cetacean species, so dolphins, whales, those kinds of animals. Dolphins are most of these observations. I don't know if that's because dolphins are very present in the oceans that we're able to navigate. They're near the top. It's not like we're getting a lot of research done on deep sea fish in Marianas Trench. So I think that's mainly due to just the proximity of dolphins and people.
And I think dolphins and whales are generally the most social as well. I mean, even other whale species, blue whales, belugas, narwhals, things like that are generally more independent. They'll be raised for a little bit and then they'll go off on their own and kind of be independent creatures. But most dolphin and porpoise species will live and operate in pods and social units, which is probably why
those tight social bonds. So some of the behaviors that have been seen in these types of species would be mothers carrying or balancing dead calves at the water's surface, probably encouraging to breathe. It could be argued whether there is a belief over a little bit of time that they are saving their calf, or if they actually do know that it is deceased. There's been instances of pod members swimming alongside or circling the deceased body of an animal, and then just other individuals repeatedly nudging or lifting up the body, so preventing that natural sink into the ocean. These behaviors can last from minutes to several days, as we know with Taliqua. 17 days is an insanely long time, more than 2 weeks. And the reason that we're looking into research like this, the reason that, people are studying this is because it's demonstrating how social bonds work with animals. It's trying to understand whether animals recognize what death is and that permanence of a conscience of a being. And then the evolution of emotions, and maybe like we're talking about with the whales, like across generations, right? They have lived within these pods that have experienced generations of community. And so, of course, these bonds are going to be very deep, maybe more so than in other types of animals. So these behaviors are often linked to the fact that this type of animal has large brains and complex social lives. So these things support sophisticated emotions or an understanding of death. Researchers caution that this is difficult to determine. Research cautions that it's difficult to determine exactly what animals feel. So again, that's why they're not going to call it grief. They're going to call it postmortem attentive behavior. So not all of creatures respond this way. Not even all cetaceans respond this way. In many cases, pods can simply leave a dead individual behind and continue on their merry way. Because of this variation, scientists disagree on whether these behaviors should be called grief or post-mortem attentive behavior. It's not human-like, but it definitely is grief-like.
Yeah, and it's interesting, especially in whales too, because I know one of the big things that has been talked about with killer whales specifically is that they almost have very distinct cultures amongst the different lineages around the planet. There's all sorts of different research into the different hunting patterns that have been handed down between orca pods around the world. There's different habits and ways that they spend their time. There's been, hilarious examples of different fashion trends that have gone on. There was that whole thing where they were killing salmon and then wearing salmon on their heads.
The salmon top hat.
Yeah, there was a salmon top hat thing going around on with different orcas around the world. So it was hilarious. And like they do literally have a culture that is bred in the different pods and
they have trends.
And they have trends and they have different connections between those different pods, and you can see around the world, you can almost map out how some of these things occur. The cooler orcas are also flipping rich people's yachts over, which is also hilarious. So, we get a bunch of these different examples. So amidst all of the different ways that they can be variant around the world, death rituals are also one of those examples, right? Where J-pod is maybe unique in the fact that they carry their dead like this, whereas some of these other orca pods will just maybe leave their dead or commemorate in other ways. I'm sure if they were to do sonar, or sonic testing, they could hear different calls or sounds or anything like that. So yeah, definitely very variant, and I think that's one of the interesting things about these studies around the animal kingdom is that a lot of this is learned behavior, and it's also inherited behavior. Some of the this leads into the next animal we were going to talk about, which was elephants. Elephants have been observed to have very complex death rituals, have been observed to have kind of almost ritualistic behavior amongst their packs after a herd member dies. They'll often gather around the deceased in a circle, sometimes touching or stroking the dead with their trunks. So when an elephant falls, they'll stand around, use their trunk to kind of feel or nudge. Younger baby elephants have been observed trying to kind of lift or nudge the dead one to their feet, kind of the way that they were nudged into standing when they were babies.
Wow.
And then they often will cover bodies with branches, leaves, or dirt, which resembles burial in a lot of ways.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting because that can be seen as burial or also offering.
Yeah. And you know what? It's interesting too because I like when I was reading about this, it was it hilariously came again with all of the asterisks of like PMAB, postmortem attentive disorder, and
it's just a behavior.
Yeah, but grief. When you think about it, you say, okay, well, why would they do that if it wasn't, something grief-based or ritualistic?
They don't do that when elephants are sleeping.
And you think about the practical implications of it, right? Okay, maybe you're hiding it from scavengers. Maybe you don't want to attract scavengers or something. And then you almost rewind a little bit and you go, okay, why did humans start burying things, right?
Exactly,
and it's
because we don't want to smell it. Which, if we were in the woods, would attract predators.
Yeah, predators, bring, potential disease, etc., right? And so, there's almost like the exact same impetus to do a lot of this stuff, and
So really,
humans have almost
humans don't
assigned
grieve
ourselves.
either. We just have post-mortem attentive behaviors, guys.
Yeah, and we've assigned value to that afterwards, and we say no, we do it, out of respect, or it's for
Yeah, it's philosophical when we do it.
it's ceremonial, but like, yeah, like, okay, you could say, okay, yeah, the elephants are burying people or burying their dead so that hyenas don't come try to come to where their pack is, and then it's like, okay, so yeah, humans
But
doing the
it's
same
also
thing, right?
like those actions take time and they take resources. So that's also like, on the contrary to them just trying to avoid predators, well, then they're giving their own resources to this deceased member.
Yeah.
They're giving their own time to this deceased member instead of just, fucking off to the next watering hole and leaving it with the hyenas.
Yeah, exactly. And to that point, elephants will often stand vigil over a deceased body for days or weeks, guarding the body from scavengers and only leaving for food or water. So,
Wow. Taking shifts.
yeah, so they'll take shifts. The pack will stay there and be around the body for as long as they can, kind of mirroring that behavior that we saw with the whale pod there as well, trying to kind of maintain the body in whatever they can, or in whatever way they can, for as long as they can. And this has interestingly been observed in all lineages of elephants from Africa all the way to Asia as well. So, so it's interesting because this was kind of supposed to be evidence that it is not a learned behavior, but rather kind of an inherited one that they kind of either do instinctually or have been doing for so long that it has been passed down to a point where there was a common ancestor
they're supposed to have
Africa,
incredible memories. So,
Yeah.
like you said, an elephant doing actions that are mimicking how it was assisted in birth is even an incredible move. Like,
Yeah. And that kind of brings us to a common myth, which is the idea of elephant graveyards. This was something, we see in The Lion King,
the
right?
Lion King taught me everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a myth grounded in reality. Elephants don't have like explicit graveyards. They don't travel to a specific place to die. Nor do live elephants carry their dead to particular locations to bury them.
Ooh, that would take a lot of elephants to carry
that would
one,
take a ton.
I think.
But elephants do tend to recognize and connect with the locations of their deceased, and they've been observed making deliberate journeys to locations where herd members have died to visit remains, and they continue to visit those spots years later, even if remains have decomposed.
Or graveyards, but they're just not organized. They are where the elephant dies, but it remains a spot of memorialization for that group of elephants.
Exactly. So herds have been observed to go miles off of their typical paths to and from,
again, risking heat, risking exhaustion.
Yeah, just to visit the site that somebody that one of their herd members has passed away at, even after the remains have been removed. It was interesting because it also the article also talked about how they will go back and pay attention to the remains that are there. They will touch the skulls that are left over that have been picked dry. They will kind of sit with them, things like that. But also, even after those bones have been cleaned up or removed or dragged away by predators, that spot still remains kind of sacred to them. They remember, they will go back to that spot and seemingly just linger for a while, paying reflection to that
they are
that
honoring their dead.
Yeah.
And again, I think that behavior, more so than anything else we've discussed so far, is exemplary of this is not something that is purely driven by self-preservation. So there's a lot of grief rituals like burial, like covering with sticks, like poking or calling out to surrounding animals that can be argued that they're kind of using this death as a learning experience or their own research to just self-preserve and protect their future generations. But to me, going back to a burial site, even long after bones are gone, is purely memorialization and acknowledgement of love. Yeah.
Exactly. And there's not too many other ways to interpret that, right? Like we were talking about this kind of like burial, and okay, there's some utilitarianism in that, in making sure that it's hidden from scavengers, etc. But when you look at like walking hundreds of miles to access a spot with no resource, no even semblance of your deceased relative.
And that arguably could be, that area could symbolize risk.
Yeah.
Because that is an area where an animal died. Yeah.
100%.
You'd think there'd be an aversion to it.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So another group of animals are corvids that have been researched by humans to show these types of behaviors. So corvids, like crows or magpies, often gather around dead companions like the elephants do. People have seen birds quietly surrounding a corpse and in some cases placing twigs, leaves on top of them before they disperse. These gatherings can serve as both social and learning functions. So again, we see it kind of as identifying potential dangers, potential risks for the murder for the group, but also paying tribute or just spending time with the deceased. So crows are highly intelligent birds, as we know, and they have been observed performing what could only be called crow funerals. So they're having gatherings where they're surrounding the deceased. They are calling out to other crows that are in their area in their murder to gather. They are leaving trinkets. They are leaving, whether you call it gifts or offerings. And they are spending time with a deceased being. So we were actually, we had the honor of witnessing a crow funeral happen in our backyard. We were very excited to have 2 sets of mated crows that were nesting and raising young right in our backyard. And I don't remember how many that ended up happening. We think one nest had 3, one nest had 2.
I think the other one had 1. I think we had 3 and 1 in 2 different nests.
Yeah. So when these fledglings, is that what we call them?
Yeah.
When these fledglings were taking flight and learning to fly, there was one that we were able to notice because we spent a lot of time in our backyard observing the crows, was having some struggles across a couple of days. He had a clear flight path pattern that he was practicing. He was getting off ground. He was making some distance, making some height, but he clearly was not thriving like his other brothers and sisters.
Yeah. For those unfamiliar, like a lot of times birds, particularly corvids, will when they feel that their young have kind of gotten old enough to leave the nest, the parents will just nudge them straight out, and then it's sink or swim there, right? You got to fly or you hit the ground. And for some of these birds, especially runts, smaller ones in the clutch, I think it is. Maybe that's just reptiles. I don't know. They will. They won't be able to fly quite yet. But they hit the ground and they just kind of try to make their way after a little while. And so usually these animals or these birds are pretty vulnerable. They might get eaten by neighborhood cats or dogs or anything like that. But if they're lucky, they could sometimes, make their way by just hopping around on the ground, figuring out how to fly from there, and then getting back up in the air. So
we're watching this little guy struggle, and we do a little research, and we find out that there's no need for us to intervene because they could be on the ground struggling for up to 10 days and still eventually get the hang of it and start thriving. So we didn't really want to interfere, but we were watching. And then one day there was a really loud cawing and gathering of crows. They had chosen a clearing, and it was very obvious to us that there was 2 competing tribes of crows, I'm talking like a dozen on either side, that had chosen an opening where they were gathering and fighting. And by fighting, I mean a crow from each side would swoop and meet in the middle. They would almost latch onto each other, not exactly like eagles do, but clearly going at each other and kind of death spiraling down.
It was pretty close. They would come together with their claws, kind of interlock and kind of go for each other. And then as their wings spread out, they kind of create this 4-winged drone that would just kind of spiral down to the ground as they kind of went at each other, and then they would separate before they hit the ground and swoop back around. It was crazy.
So I would call that a war because it is an organized group fighting another organized group. It was very incredible to watch. It was loud. They were so loud, cheering each other on.
It was a cacophony.
It was a cacophony. It was also surprisingly civilized. Instead of just 12 crows going at 12 crows. It was so interesting to watch them like take turns. It was like the gladiators. Like it was one on one.
Yeah. Yeah, a little bit. It was like a gladiator arena. And there was like a little bit of additional activity where like one bird would kind of come to the other side and like try to kick another one off the branch. But yeah, the main like fight was in the center of this ring of trees where they would like hit, death spiral, and then fly off. And like our attention got drawn to this because there was so much noise. Like we could hear it from our backyard, that there was just like this massive and so we walked over to where it was coming from, and we looked up, and yeah, just like a ring of crows kind of in a big circle, and then yeah, one from either side would kind of come in and they would strike, they would fall, the next ones would come in and they would just
majestic.
Yeah,
it was scary.
it was incredible.
So I bring this up because this was one of a few examples that we got to witness with our own eyes of the crows in our very own backyard having communities, having these intricate dynamics with other crow communities, and very much showing their loyalty to one another that is clearly of a certain type of bond, whether it's blood or familial or the murder.
Yeah, and we can only guess as to why this was occurring, but you know, we had just been observing crows nesting and then raising their young, and these babies that we were talking about had just left the nest probably 3 to 4 days earlier. The small crow that we said was struggling to get off the ground was still hopping around out there. So we were kind of looking at this and going, okay, I wonder if this is like, you know, like a turf dispute, or maybe one had killed a member of another family,
or just attacked a weakling.
Yeah. Crows are known to do that. They can be cannibalistic. They can attack other young. They'll often kill babies that are not their own, in order to kind of, you know, strengthen their own bloodline, or control territory or things like that. They have been known to have these social dynamics. So, you know, we knew that there was these 3 or 4 young birds kind of around there, so we could, you know, we were thinking, hey, yeah, what if, you know, there was an attack, one of them got killed, one of the, you know, this or that, and it spurred this whole thing, you know, territorial dispute, call it whatever you want, but yeah,
so
it was really interesting.
Like when we see all this going on, we're like, okay, well then I wonder where the babies are. Are the juveniles watching this, or are they elsewhere where we saw them nested and learning to fly?
So we went looking, and I think the 3 from the one nest, I believe, we kind of saw them on low branches in the trees nearby. So they were kind of nearby, but obviously not in the conflict there. They weren't getting close. But the baby that was stuck on the ground that we had been kind of tracking and empathizing with a lot, he was kind of hopping back and forth between the fence because he hadn't quite figured out how to get a full flight in yet. He was able to fly maybe 10, 15 feet, and then he would kind of hit the ground and hop along again. And so we went over to where the commotion was, and he was actually on the ground along a fence there that kind of lines our yard. And when we walked over to him, he got a little bit spooked and tried to kind of run away from us in a different direction, which obviously, so we gave him the space, we backed up. But then I heard him making a bunch of noise. He was cawing. And he had tried to kind of wedge his way through the fence, which he had done multiple times before. We'd seen him on kind of both sides of this fence throughout the days. But it looks like the hole that he chose in the fence had a little branch that was kind of sticking up and had kind of hooked his foot against the chain link fence there. So I went over and I was, you know, trying to see if there was anything I could do for this little guy. And it was interesting because his parents were in the crow war off, 20 feet behind us.
To war.
But when I went over and tried to, help him out, they diverted themselves from the war and came and swooped in at us, but very quickly turned around to go back to it because they were obviously needed at war. So they left, and so the crow is left here stuck in the fence. So I ran over and was trying to help him out. Charlotte went and grabbed me her garden shears so that I could clip that little branch that was stuck against his leg. So I very carefully kind of snipped that branch, and it was funny because I ended up feeling like I actually didn't need to do anything, but I kind of got him and tried to kind of fold his wing back very softly in the natural fold.
So I don't think he could have compressed his body enough to smoothly get in there.
He was panicking a little bit, but I basically just tried to kind of press his his wing into his body again, trying very carefully. I know bird bones are delicate. I was terrified that I was going to break him. I didn't want to, but as I kind of touched his wing, he kind of freaked out from me and wiggled forward, and then that got him through. So I really didn't need to do all that much. I just needed to get that branch clear. But then he took off. He flew away. He flew like another 20 feet or something.
Yeah, low
and then,
flight, but
yeah,
did
low
fly.
flight. But then he hid in a little bush that's right in front of our unit in our apartment and stayed there for the next hour or two. So we were able to kind of just watch him from our balcony and keep an eye on him.
Yeah, so we called this guy Chain Link because we were able to watch him for the next couple of days because he did hang out in the bush right across from our back porch. So we were recognizing him. We were seeing him hang out with some of the other juveniles. We also started to see him a little less after a couple of days, and we were hoping that that was a good sign that he was just off flying circles around his friends, learning, being just a successful crow.
Yeah, we had seen him fly like actual flights. There's a building kind of right across from us here, and we had seen him going from the fence that he was caught in, like from the top of that fence over to the building and back and on top of trees and stuff.
Yeah, and I really thought if he was making that much height that he was in the clear. But yeah, they're still just so vulnerable during that phase of their lives, and who knows what it was. I thought he looked pretty messed up when he got stuck in the fence, so he could have broken something small and gotten an infection. Like, we just don't know. But anyways, so after a couple of days of noticing this little crow, seeing him a little less for maybe a day or two, Kieran again hears a lot of cawing outside of our door and goes out back, and what we find are 2 or 3 juveniles in the trees, or mainly 2 of them, which we think were his siblings, cawing and not moving, and they're on a low branch, and these birds have been hanging out a little bit higher because their parents warned them, don't be near the cats, but they were lower than they normally are, like right at our eye level in the branches, and we're trying to figure out what they're doing because they're really drawing attention to themselves. And then we see Chain Link on the ground. He is deceased. It probably had only been maybe a couple hours, we think, just based on the amount of bugs, and again, we're out there every day. We didn't see him there the day before.
Yeah, and like I had left out a little bird bath on the ground there. I had kind of big steel bin that I just put a couple rocks in with some water, and I had kind of left it for both the crows and for just the neighborhood dogs walking by and stuff to grab some water from, especially with the hot weather lately. So, but yeah, he was laying there kind of dead just on the other side of that watering bowl, and this was kind of right above where he had been hanging out the day that we freed him there. So, yeah, like it seemed like that was kind of his a place that he was just kind of spending time. And yeah, we don't know what happened, if it was maybe just hunger, again, he was probably 8 or 9 or maybe even 10 days out from leaving the nest at this point.
Yeah.
But he was still having a hard time flying, so I can imagine that
Mom and Dad were feeding him the first couple days, but we don't think they were feeding him past the first couple days.
Yeah,
so.
Mom and Dad might have given up on him. Maybe they died in the Crow War, who knows, but he was clearly kind of lacking in something, and it might have just been that he kind of gave out and didn't have the energy to keep going. But what was really interesting was, we kind of came out, and Charlotte was just having a smoke, and I kind of came out and saw her, and she was like, "Oh, I've been watching these crows, they're just kind of hanging out right here." And there was I think 3 or 4 of them just kind of on these low branches, eye level, just all kind of sitting right around us. And then I looked down and saw, and I said, "Hey, is that him?" And sure enough, he had kind of died and just fallen to the ground underneath them. So they were gathering. There was clearly like a crow funeral, and they sat there for well over an hour. We sat there with them, and they had all just kind of been sitting very gently, like no caw. Well, they were cawing early in the morning. We heard it when we woke up,
but then just kind of silently standing vigil. None of them that we saw went down to Chain Link's body, so they were kind of just in the branches just above him. And yeah, it was sad to see, but it was kind of beautiful just that his death was acknowledged in a way. And so now Kieran and I are in this position where We know that this is a path where all of our neighbors walk their dogs. It is a very well used path. It's very green, but it is also very suburban. So it is not the best place for this little crow to just naturally stay where he dies and, return to the earth. He will get, unfortunately, touched by another animal if we leave him there.
Yeah,
So
and there's outbreaks of bird flu and stuff around as well. So
yeah,
just danger for pets
cats.
and yeah.
So we had to do something, but we didn't want to do it fast. So we basically waited until they had a couple of hours with this crow's body. And then we felt like we had to bury him. So we dug a little hole that was as close as we could get to the actual spot where he died. We did lift his body up a little bit, just towards them in the trees. This is corny, but we were almost trying to show them that, he's beyond help. We are going to take his body now, but we don't kind of mean any disrespect. Obviously, I don't think that was communicated clearly, but we tried in whatever way we could, and we buried him, and we put a rock on top so that the scavengers couldn't get to him. And what was really interesting, if you want to just share what you found all over our lawn a couple days later, was it the next day or a couple days?
It was a few days later. And yeah, it was very interesting. And I'm like, PMAB. I'm trying not to like attribute,
Our human feelings.
Yeah. Well, and like, there's a lot of other, but anyway, I started finding these like polished rocks all around our yard here, which was very odd because there's rocks and stuff all over. We have some pathways that are paved with gravel and stuff.
And
but
again,
like,
I know this is crazy, but we know we're out there so much. We know our rocks.
yeah, exactly. Like I noticed it because I was like carrying trash outside, and as I was taking it to the back, I looked down and I was like, "That's a nice rock." And I came back and as I was walking back from taking the trash out, I went, "Hey, that's also a nice rock." And I picked up 4 or 5 or 6 of them. And yeah, just all along the path from the back of our building to our unit, there was rocks, and there was no rocks further along. There was no rocks, beyond the point where we had buried him. And actually, I wish I had brought them in. I can show them on camera. But yeah, they were all just like nicely, actually like polished, smooth rocks. Like they were like rocks that you would find in like
they had been tumbled.
Like,
I don't know if they were found in water. Or what.
Yeah. Like they might have been river rocks or something. But there was like 6 or 7 of them along the path, and my brain immediately like went like, oh, maybe some kid collected them at the beach, and as they were walking to their apartment, they were just dropping them or something. Which still could be the case. We never saw any crows dropping them.
Didn't see
but
it happen.
Knowing the crows and kind of seeing that acknowledgement, and the fact that we kind of displayed to them where we were burying him, and then there was a bunch of these shiny rocks around. There's a part of me that kind of like wants to believe and wants to like hope that these crows kind of had a ceremony or something to express that
they left
care
some
for their
offerings.
sibling. Yeah, like an offering. So we gathered up all those rocks, we put them on top of the little boulder that we put over him. Maybe it means something, maybe it didn't. Could have been happenstance.
Yeah.
Like I said, could have just been a 6-year-old in our building that really likes rocks. But yeah, there's a part of me that like knows that they saw and acknowledged him, and wants to believe that there was kind of something a little bit more to that.
And like we read in the research that we were doing for this episode, there have been a lot of examples of leaving gifts, leaving trinkets, especially corvids. That is a love language to them. So yeah, we don't know. We didn't see it happen. We just found a bunch of little gifts right near this little crow burial.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah.
So the next thing.
So another way we can talk about the disposition of animals is just how we care for our pets when they die. And as we kind of alluded to in our last podcast episode, we recently lost our beloved boy Captain, beautiful 13-year-old cat. He was very special to us, and it just so happened that because of the work that I do in death care, I have been privy to and been a part of a lot of activism and research around terramation, which is putting a body in a vessel with nitrogen-rich organics and straw to absorb moisture, and basically creating the ideal environment for natural decomposition to happen. And basically, a body is turned into soil, and in anywhere from 30 to 90 days, depending on, person or animal and how it's performed. So it is a very natural process, but terramation or natural organic reduction is more kind of just alluding to it being minorly human intervention, in the sense that we're trying to optimize the circumstances for ideal decomposition. So, with all of this knowledge in my head and in the grief of losing my own pet, we were faced with some options, and I had already talked to Kieran in the past about the option of terramation for Captain. So, Captain died a little bit, actually quite a bit unexpectedly. We did not have time to prepare in a way that I had always imagined when I thought about the disposition for our own pet. So we were in a position where we basically had to make it work within 24 hours if we wanted to do a terramation for our pet at home. And what this involved was going to like a Canadian Tire, getting a lockable outdoor storage bin, so just something that is made out of plastic that's a nice decent size to support our boy as well as the organic mix. We set that up at home. It was really the stars aligning in our community. I reached out to a lot of different entities that like really came through in that 24-hour period. I reached out to a farm in Abbotsford that provided us free hay and alfalfa to place in his vessel with him. I also went to a local Home Hardware and Canadian Tire, Home Hardware, where they do like lumber cutting, and it turns out they just have bags of sawdust that they throw out at the end of every day because it's a fire hazard. So sawdust is a very good thing to have in a terramation vessel because it's a great moisture wicking material. So I got a whole bunch of that for free, and basically in 24 hours we were able to set up this vessel. It was a plastic vessel just in our garden, and it had a base layer of sawdust and cedar wood pellets, and then it had a whole bunch of layers of alfalfa and hay. I also threw in a little bit of cedar mulch just because I enjoy the smell of it, and it made it more pleasant for me. And then we used a little bit of burlap just to kind of be a surface for our cat to lay into. So then we were able to go to the animal hospital and bring his body home, which I don't know if everyone asks, but just so everyone knows, that is an option. So if you're thinking about, if you have pet companions at home that you think you would need to see or smell this animal to get some sort of closure or realization of the fact that this animal has died, it's worth asking your vet. So yeah, we brought him home. We did, as Kieran had talked about, show him to our other cat. And then we were able to go outside and place his body in this vessel, have our own little ceremony for him, which we won't get into, but it was beautiful. And then basically on top of him, we placed the remainder of our organics. So we placed more alfalfa and hay, and followed by more sawdust, more cedar pellets, and then cedar mulch. And then we just locked and closed it. And it is basically sitting in our yard. It acts like a compost bin. It has now been over a month. There's no odors. We have rotated the vessel to encourage more oxygen throughout the mix, because basically what you're doing is you're just creating an environment to encourage the natural microbes in our bodies to take over in the decomposition process and convert our bodies into the base compounds, which are soil.
Yeah, and it's a it was a really beautiful process to be a part of, and absolutely like nice to know that he's gonna be able to kind of continue being part of nature. Like I think when people do cremation or something like that, like it feels very like destructive almost. Like it takes from the natural cycle of life in a way.
Right.
Like
There's no continuation of energy from ash.
Yeah, and so I think like knowing that he's in there is like there's some mental hurdles to get over. Absolutely. Like, you have to think about decomposition a little bit more. But, we had this discussion recently where we were talking about kind of, like we made the joke about how my grandma refuses to acknowledge a natural or green burial for herself because she doesn't want the bugs to get her. But
she doesn't want to think about her own microbes.
yeah. But she's gonna be in a casket at some point in the ground. That casket's only gonna last so long, Grandma. The bugs are gonna get you. So there's a few things like that where like you got to get over that initial mental hurdle, but once you do, it really is kind of a beautiful and meaningful way to do it. And the fact that we get to keep him close to home in the garden that he loved so much and the place that he loved to be when he was spending his days is just so incredibly meaningful. So yeah, it's interesting looking at the ways that people kind of want to acknowledge or maintain their pets and their animals. We chose something that was really meaningful for us, that was meaningful for Charlotte as a funeral director with an interest in green death care. But also, like, one of the topics that I kind of wanted to bring up in this episode that we're kind of transitioning to here is the idea of just like animal preservation and kind of the human rituals for the way that we interact with these animals, right? The way that we chose to do it is fairly unique. I don't think there's too many pet owners that are choosing something like that.
I'm going to say you're right because I could not find any information to help me. I had to just do math comparatively to human terramation.
Yeah. And like, it was interesting because you were talking about this in the case of like farm animals. Like, this is actually how farms handle a lot of their animals, like a dead horse or something. It's got to be disposed of somehow. And yeah, like digging a grave for a horse is something you can do, but usually it is a combination of organics in a predefined spot, either in a barn or in a in a pre-dug ditch or something like that.
It's going to be some sort of vessel that can be reused for the next animal, and is converting bodies into soil that can go back to the earth.
Yeah. And I mean, it makes sense from an agricultural perspective because, again, it's giving back to the earth. It's part of the food chain. It's maintaining that soil enrichment and stuff, giving back to the land that gave to the animal in the first place. And so, yeah, it's very interesting that, like, for us, that was the choice. But, we were talking a little bit about the exploration of, like, people that almost, like, go a little bit further with it, where there's, things like taxidermy, I think, is something that's kind of an interesting area of this, where I think, like, it gives some people the ick, but for a lot of other people, there's kind of this, like, desire to preserve the essence or the image of life at all costs. And people will kind of go that far into taxidermying their pets or maintaining certain pieces of their pets, like a preserved paw or something like that versus, maybe
even
the
like
whole body,
whiskers
but like
and jewelry,
and it's an interesting world to kind of think of in terms of the way that people interact with this, because I think so the impetus of what got me thinking about this was a friend of mine added me to a oddities and curiosities for sale group on Facebook because they thought I might find a particular thing very interesting. What they tagged me for.
Because you've been to every expo, because I drag you there. You're a known face in the community.
Yeah. But it was interesting because now I'm getting suggested posts from this group all the time. And some of it is like a little bit endearing, where it's like, oh yeah, like, my pet passed away and I just had him taxidermied and I'm so glad that I can keep him forever. And the taxidermy is well done. The cat looks lifelike. It's like, okay, like little macabre, a little weird, but I can totally understand. And if that's comfortable for you,
you're okay with it, it's part of your process. Okay.
Yeah.
Or like pinned bugs. I'm a fan of pinned insects.
We got a bunch right up there. Yeah.
I don't know much about how ethical the process is of these exotic bugs coming to the expos where I can just buy them in a little frame. But I do know that I'm fascinated by them. So I definitely understand the morbid curiosity part of these oddities and curiosities expos.
Yeah. And it's like the thing that kind of the question that I was starting to kind of get to in my head here was like, there's some stuff in these groups that almost seems unethical, where I'm like, okay, you're stretching really hard to like preserve something that probably shouldn't be like,
So give me an example.
like, okay, so I've seen like a lot of cases where somebody just says like, oh, I was out with my dog and we found a dead rabbit or
Mm.
something. Like, just in the woods, dead animal, who, like,
And
oh,
I'm going to take this into my possession, take it home,
exactly.
chemically treat it, heat treat it, insect treat it, whatever method you're using. And then is for you, is the ethical issue coming in turning these remains into art pieces, or is it coming from more the commodification and selling and profit off of these bodies?
I think it's a little bit of both. Like, I think for me, a big thing is like, I do maintain a lot of utilitarian views on death and the cycle of life and stuff. You know, I've registered to be an organ donor, and I would love to have a green burial.
Hmm.
I would love to offer myself back to the world that nurtured me. Um,
Right.
and I think that, yeah, like literally something that is part of the natural food chain, a dead rabbit, something that is just out in nature, you should maintain that, like, being part of that ecosystem, right?
Yeah, if I'm being
It's
honest, it is kind of human hubris to even think, to even look at roadkill and think, I need to do something about it.
yeah, exactly, right. And like, I even kind of had that conundrum when I saw the crow that we buried, right?
Right.
I was
Do we
almost
leave
like,
it?
I was almost like, we should just kind of let nature do its thing. And the tipping point for me was like, oh yeah, we've got a bird flu or epidemic going on right now. There's pets around here. It's like literally biologically unsafe, so we should bury
Yeah.
it. And by burying it, we still allow the, you know, the bugs and the worms to get it. It's still nurturing the soil, things like that, right? But like, yeah, there's a lot of things in this group where like, and I've just seen like very odd or tragic things be turned into objects in a way, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, oh, like my dog had a stillborn litter of puppies or something like that. Like yeah, I've seen that, and
Wait,
people are like,
seriously?
yeah, I
As
saw,
a wet specimen?
yeah, they preserved them in like jars as a wet specimen,
Okay.
and I was like,
Okay, I can see what you're
yeah,
saying.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of posts like that that are like very weird, like, you know, like not just like, oh, this is personal to me, or like, oh, I found this, you know, skull in nature and I
Yeah.
restored it. It was like very directly like, oh, hey, a death happened around me and I need to like
Like, can you
objectify it,
honestly
you know?
say that that using a stillborn puppy as a wet specimen is part of your grieving process, or are you more doing that as a conversation piece?
Yeah, well,
You
it's,
know?
yeah, it's almost it's like a morbid obsession, or like, you know, and
Yeah.
like, yeah,
It's
and
it comes back to, we talk about this a lot. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
yeah, exactly. So, you know, and it's weird because I do think that there's kind of this like very big gray area between practices that are used to kind of support the grieving process, to, you know, allow people space to kind of process, into these weird other areas of like, is it art, is it a skill, is it a hobby, is it a,
Right.
you know, things like that. And to your other point, commodification, that's the big thing that really bothers me, is like, I've seen, you know, like people clearly have businesses based around this, right? There's
Hmm.
Etsy shops of, you know, so and so's curiosities, and the weirder a creature that they can sustain in a weirder way, the more attractive it is to some of these weird
Okay, so
collectors,
let
right?
me
So
let
like,
me just tell you this, and I think this is an interesting conversation for us to have, because again, we go to these expos. I find taxidermy fascinating. I find it very captivating to look at. I definitely have that morbid curiosity and that interest, but even I. A self-proclaimed weirdo, do feel a pang seeing you put a price tag on a deceased rat that you have dressed up as the Moulin Rouge burlesque dancer in full garb,
yeah,
you know, in a sexy pose.
yeah,
Like it
yeah,
is strange.
yeah, it's strange. And you know, it's weird to me because there's some of it where I just kind of like laugh at it. Like, again, like, yeah, the rat dressed up as a burlesque dancer. Rats are everywhere. They die all the time from all sorts of different reasons. And fuck, if you want to make that your art form, sure, go for it. But like, yeah, like there's some weird elements of it where like I almost dislike the uh like the emotional state that some people almost get in, where like there's almost like an excitement about the tragedy, right? Like I feel like some of these people
Again, the
are
weirder
like,
the better, the more
yeah,
deformed the better. We've seen people actually like preserve or taxidermy animals in the way that they died on the road, like with a fake tire track through
yeah, yeah,
them.
yeah,
Like, yeah, and I guess, you know, humans do this to a lot of things in nature. We feel like we own it just because we can control it, just because we can manipulate it, just because we can transform it.
yeah,
But in reality, these are all animals that without human intervention, again, we can't speak to animal emotions or say what they would want, but what would happen is a decompose where you die
yeah,
situation. It is a green burial, for lack of a better term. It is falling where you are and returning to the earth. You know, we don't naturally turn into burlesque rats after we die. That was a lot of human
yeah,
intervention to get there.
yeah, and so I think this kind of transitions into the final topic that I wanted to talk about a little bit, which is kind of like the extension of selective empathy to other creatures and other animals. And this kind of
Like you
came to,
said, like when you said that thing about rats, I was a little peeved. Like,
yeah,
you know, it should be no different when we talk about a rat being forced to wear a bikini post-mortem versus a cat, you know?
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that this is a very interesting area, and it was one that I actually got into a really good discussion with somebody about on Facebook the other day, because they were kind of espousing the idea that there's a massive double standard in the way that people perceive and empathize with animals,
Yeah.
and the point that they
And
made
it's almost
was,
different for most people. Like people, even
yeah,
individually, have different standards of how they empathize.
yeah, yeah, and the main, I guess, thesis of his point was, I think actually the first example he used was a cockroach versus a butterfly, right? Most people would
Mm.
not be incensed much if you stepped on a cockroach, but they would be kind of peeved if you just went out of your way to kill a butterfly, right? And there's this kind of sense of like um, of empathy that we have towards something that we find beautiful, that we have a emotional response to, or that we find beautiful, versus a cockroach. And it
Or
was,
that we find symbolism in. It could
yeah,
be as simple as it's something that was written about in our history, you
yeah,
know, or something that became a metaphor as part of human existence. We attach our own meaning onto it that says, okay, this is something I'm going to care about compared to the cockroach.
yeah, and he made that example kind of saying, like, arguably a cockroach is even maybe a more complex creature than a butterfly, but we still kind of have that. And I think that metaphor kind of fell apart a little bit in the discussion, because somebody else had pointed out that, like, okay, but cockroaches are a pest that impact our lives, right? They eat our food, they infest our houses, they take from us in a way that makes them adversarial towards us, whereas a butterfly does not have any, interaction with the human world. A butterfly, if anything, is a pollinator
It's
that
so
helps
human
bring,
to even
you
think of
know,
an insect as adversarial.
yeah, 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 exactly. So it was interesting, because that metaphor like went away, but then he brought up the the dog versus pig standard, right? Suidae, the pigs are generally more or equal to intelligent, or equally as intelligent as a dog, and they have much of the same capacities. You could raise a pig in your house. It would love to cuddle. It would love to get scritches. It would love to go outside and play with you, play fetch, all of those
It
sorts
would
of
answer
things.
to its
Um,
name. It would maybe bond with other
yep.
pets. Yeah.
And we see a killing and eating a pig as totally okay, but we would be abhorrent towards the idea of that being the case for a dog, right?
Yeah, Western
Um,
society can't even handle animals dying in cinema. Like it creates a bigger grief response in cinema goers
yeah,
to see a dog die than a human
yeah,
being.
absolutely.
Yeah, so it's like this, we've attached this almost to our domesticated animals. We've attached this innocence that we don't attribute to other animals. In other animals, we interpret that innocence as like vacancy.
Yeah, yeah, and so it was interesting because my friend made this whole point about the dog pig thing and the equivalency and the double standard there. And and it was interesting because I mean I'm a shit disturber. I like to play the devil's advocate, and I wasn't arguing with him on the grounds that that wasn't true. I actually really agree with that point. But one of the things that I kind of pushed back on was saying, like, you know, it's interesting because I think something that's getting lost in the way that he presented it was that, you know, he was saying, okay, you're a hypocrite because you believe that a dog dying is not okay and a pig dying is okay. And while that might be true, I think the point that I expanded on and kind of made was like, I really think that that kind of models how empathy is developed as like a social construct, right? In society,
Depends what you've had relationship to.
exactly, yeah. And so the point I made was like, you know, throughout your life, you probably ate a pig before you ever saw one live.
That is crazy.
Yeah, that's great. Like as a kid, you probably got handed a piece of bacon before you ever saw
Yes.
a real live pig. You probably saw a piece of media, a TV show where a dog was a human's friend before you ever saw anything like that for a pig. Like
Right.
maybe if you were born in that one sliver of time where Babe was the movie, maybe that's not the case.
Charlotte's
But like,
Web.
yeah, but like you were, you know, inherently you grew up with this image of dog as man's best friend. And dogs in the household. You might have grown up with a dog in your household, things
And
like that,
even
right? And
proximity doesn't necessarily dictate what that relationship is going to be. Because when you were talking about the pig versus dog standard, my mind immediately went to like, when I've seen advocacy for the intelligence and emotional intelligence of pigs, it's been from some sort of farmer, but there's also other people in the farming industry who farm pigs for meat, and they might have like a dual acknowledgement of this. They would be present enough to be able to acknowledge compassionate behaviors, relationships between pigs and their families, but they're also kind of having this cognitive dissonance of working in the meat industry, and they are raising those animals to be killed.
yeah, exactly. And I think this really comes around to the kind of the anthropocentrism of that empathy, right? Where there is empathy extended towards animals that are like us or that fall into a certain caste that we have dictated for them. And there is that empathy kind of stripped away societally from animals that are deemed useful to us in you know, in labor and livestock, in other such things, right? We kind of strip the for lack of a better word, humanity, the agency of a creature when it has you know, utility to us as meat or as, you know,
We
even
compartmentalize
yeah,
that.
even as like a work animal, right? Like a horse or something like that, that we maybe don't necessarily eat, but that we use as a tool. We kind of take some of that away. And so it's interesting kind of going back through this whole discussion that we've just had about animal grief and their ability to process and feel emotion, and then bring that all the way back around to this idea that, like, you know, we very selectively empathize with certain animals that have similar social constructs or have similar levels of intelligence to us, or
Or
you
just
know, who,
express that in a language that we are able to interpret.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
again, all of this is surrounding research that's trying to, it's all, there's a lot of comparative acknowledgement, a lot of acknowledgement that we are comparing an animal experience to a human one and just doing our best to interpret the way that they express whatever they're experiencing. Yeah.
yeah. And on this point of kind of that anthropocentric empathy, one thing I wanted to just like make a shout out to is there's a YouTube channel called Philosophy that I have recently gotten very into. A very small channel, only hitting like 10 20K views, but makes the most incredibly produced videos I've seen in a while. This guy is insane. He should be topping out YouTube charts. But he did this incredible video just the other week called Evolve or Die. And the concept of the video was a general approach to understanding how humans need to evolve to survive the climate apocalypse. In that, his belief is that we kind of need to evolve past the idea that we are the singular being within our ecosystem, right? The failing point of humans right now is that we
have this
feel ourselves
centrism.
separate or above the environment, right? And his thought was like the kind of the rough thesis of the video
Adversarial,
is
right?
that we're not actually an evolved species, because an evolved species would understand their place in the ecosystem that they operate within, and they would support it. They would be
Yeah.
symbiotic with the nature, whereas humans right now are parasitic of nature. We take from it according to our needs rather than giving back according to nature's needs as well. So he did this really incredible video, and a lot of it kind of came around to this idea that we have kind of an evolved idea of separatism from nature, where we are different than the animals that we share the planet with, and because of that, we lack the ability to to evolve to a degree where we will survive a climate catastrophe, right?
Yeah.
We are not thinking
We're
about it
not
in a way
doing it
because we don't
alone.
have that
We're
empathy,
not
right?
doing it central or separate from our environment or the other beings on
Yeah.
the planet, which I actually think is a great way to wrap this up
Yeah.
because, it's again just to me exemplifying the human need to identify things as separate from our own experience. And so I would argue once and for all that the behaviors we talked about today are more than just post-mortem attentive behavior.
Fuck PMAB.
You fuck PMAB. They are acts of grief and ritual amongst our fellow Earth inhabitants.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think science can be as choosy with its words as it wants to be, but I think the things that we've explored today are definitively grief. They are definitively emotion, and to consider ourselves separate from it and to try to classify and hierarchicalize, if that's even a fucking word, the behaviors of nature, I think is extremely arrogant. So yeah, fuck science hippies and fuck
We
PMAB.
witnessed a crow funeral.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we know it's real. Go watch Philosophy. Go check it out. That channel is amazing. We'll link it down in the description below. Thanks for hanging out with us, though. That's been our second episode on animals and death in the animal kingdom.
Yeah. Thanks for sitting with us. Take care.